The footman came for the portrait on a Tuesday evening in October, in the 43rd year of Cecily Ashmore's life, and she watched from the long gallery window as two men she did not recognize removed her face from the wall where it had hung for 17 years. She had not known they were coming. No one had told her. She had simply looked up from her correspondence at the writing desk the housekeeper had arranged in the small sitting room off the east guest corridor, and heard the sound of something being lifted 2 floors above her. A soft scrape of wood against plaster. A murmur exchanged between strangers, and some old instinct had carried her feet up the back staircase and into the gallery. Before she understood, she had meant to go there. The autumn light through the tall windows was already failing, the last of the afternoon fallen behind the tree line, and the candles in the gallery sconces had not yet been lit. She stood at the far end of the room in the gray between day and evening, and watched them work. The portrait had been painted in the autumn of her marriage, the year she was 26, in a gown of pale gold silk that no longer existed anywhere but in the canvas, with her dark hair dressed high in the fashion of that season, and a spray of gilt and amber leaves at her shoulder that the artist had softened into something nearly mythological, more symbol than botanical fact. Her husband's family had commissioned it. His mother had chosen the pose and the placement of the window light and the particular arrangement of her hands that Cecily had found difficult to hold for more than 20 minutes without her fingers beginning to ache. It had hung in the gallery between his grandfather's formal portrait and a pastoral scene of the Northfield grounds since the autumn of her first year as Duchess of Northfield, and it had outlasted everything else she had brought into this house, including, in the end, her own claim to be inside it. She had not intended to return. She needed you to understand that before anything else. She had not come back to reclaim anything or to say anything she had not managed to say in the years between then and now. She had come because her solicitor had written in September to say that the terms of the original settlement required her physical presence to confirm certain corrections to the property transfer documents, corrections to a small parcel of land in Derbyshire that had been her father's legacy and that had been incorrectly subsumed into the Northfield estate during the drawing of the marriage settlement documents 11 years ago. A clerical error, her solicitor had called it, 3 times over 6 years in 3 separate letters to the estate's solicitors. A matter requiring her in person, he had now told her, as the estate had continued not to resolve it any other way. The third Duke, who was 22 years old and in possession of everything his father had left him, had sent a letter through his own solicitor in response. The letter said, in its careful formal language, that her presence at Northfield on the 15th of October for the purpose of executing the corrective documents would be, and this was the word he had chosen, or that his solicitor had chosen on his behalf, acceptable. She had read the word twice, set the letter aside, and begun to pack. The first man lifted the portrait clear of the hook, and the space it left on the wall appeared with the immediacy of an absence that had always been waiting there. A pale rectangle against the warmer surrounding paint, the shape of a woman's shoulders and head, and the gilded frame that had held her. 2 feet of visible difference between where the light had not reached in 17 years and the wall that had been around it. The second man wrapped the frame in cloth, without particular ceremony. Neither of them looked toward the end of the gallery where Cecily stood. She was, apparently, as easy to overlook in reality as she was in the portrait, which was perhaps the most coherent summary of her marriage that had ever been offered. She had arrived at Northfield that afternoon on the post coach from Bath, where she had lived for the past 6 years in rooms on Camden Place that were comfortable and considerably smaller than anything she had occupied before the age of 30. The village of Northfield had received her with the particular efficiency of a place that had decided how to account for her and had not revisited the decision. In the post office, A woman she had never met had spoken to the shopkeeper in the lowered voice of someone conveying accurate information, and said that the first Duchess was dead to this county the day she left, and that whatever she was now, she was not the woman who had hung on that gallery wall, and that some people returned to places that were finished with them, as though returning were the same as belonging. And it was not. Cecily had been standing 2 feet away at the letter window. She had heard every word. She had collected her correspondence and walked out into the October afternoon, and had not turned around. The gallery was empty now. The men had gone with the portrait, through the far door, into whatever storage the household had arranged. The pale rectangle on the wall where her face had been looked, in the dying light, like an open door leading to a room the house had not decided what to do with. She stood and looked at it for a moment, and then she went back downstairs. She was a guest here. She understood this with the particular clarity of a woman who has understood her own diminishment so many times that it no longer required new comprehension, only recognition, the way one recognizes a room one has slept in before and knows, from the set of the window and the sound the floorboards make, exactly what it will ask of you. She would have the East guest room. She would be served at the household's hours. She would complete her business with the solicitor, and she would leave on the afternoon coach, and the pale rectangle on the wall would be given back its painting, and she would be in Bath by evening, and it would be as though she had not been here, which was, in all the ways that counted, how it had been for 6 years already. She had thought that was enough to sustain her through this visit. She had prepared carefully. She had been wrong. The drawing room she was shown to by the housekeeper was not the drawing room she had known. Arabella, the new Duchess, who had been a Miss Fontenoy before her marriage, and who was, by all reports that reached Bath, a pleasant and composed young woman of considerable good sense, had had it redone in the modern manner, the walls a clear, soft blue, where the second Duchess had kept them a dark gold that had always felt to Cecily like being inside something that had swallowed you. The furniture was lighter, more delicate. The old portraits replaced by landscapes in which no one's face demanded anything of you. It was a pleasant room. It was not her room. She sat in a chair near the fire and waited for someone to come and tell her what happened next, and tried not to notice how precisely she knew the sound of every house in the corridor outside. What happened next was the Duke. He came in without being announced, which was not the way the house had done things in the second Duke's time, but which seemed, from the absence of surprise in the housekeeper's departure, to be the third Duke's own habit. He made the particular quiet of a very large man who has learned to move without preceding himself, and she noticed him before she heard him. The shift in the room's quality of attention that happened when someone of significant presence entered it. She had noticed his father that way, once, at the beginning, before the beginning had become the middle, and then the end. He was his father's son in the set of the jaw, and in the particular stillness that lived between his words, the quality of a man who thought before he spoke, and who did not speak, more than he had thought. He was darker than his father, the hair nearly black against the pale of his cravat, and he was built more sparely, with less of his father's broadness through the shoulder, and he was 22, which she kept forgetting and then remembering again with a small interior start, because he moved like a man who had been managing large things for considerably longer than that. "Mrs. Ashmore," he said. "Your Grace," she said. He did not offer his hand, and she did not rise. "The solicitor will attend at 9 tomorrow morning," he said. His voice was level and formal, and she could hear the preparation in it, the way one can hear when a sentence has been composed in advance. Breakfast is served at 8. My wife asks that you will dine with us this evening, if you are not too tired from the journey. The fire made a small sound in the grate. Please convey my acceptance to the Duchess, she said. I am not tired. He looked at her for a moment. The expression was not cold. She had been prepared for cold, having spent 11 years learning its specific Northfield variety, the variety that maintained every correct form while removing the warmth that would have made the forms mean anything. This was not that. This was something she could not immediately classify, a quality of attention that felt specific and deliberate, as though she was being looked at by someone who had decided to look, rather than someone who had found her in his field of vision by accident. I did not order the portrait taken down, he said. She had not expected him to raise it. I did not imagine you had, she said. My wife's mother arrived this afternoon, before I knew she was expected here today. I have spoken to her. She looked at the fire. In the second Duke's time, there had been a woman, not his mother, but his mother's closest friend, who had done things in this house that could not be undone before anyone knew to prevent them, and who had explained them afterward with the pleasant confidence of someone who had only meant to be helpful. She recognized the family of behavior. The portrait is in the storage room off the East Passage, he said. If you wish to take it with you when you go. It is yours by rights. It was commissioned for the house, but there is nothing in the entail to hold it. She looked at him. He was still watching her, with that same quality she had been trying to name since he came through the door. I would not want it, she said. It is a portrait of someone who does not quite exist anymore. The woman in it did not know what she was walking into. I would prefer to leave her here. Something changed in his face when she said that. Not a great change. The kind of change that a man who has learned to contain most things permits himself in a moment when containment costs more than he wants to pay. She had not seen it clearly enough to name it before he had it managed again. As you wish, he said, and left. She sat alone with the fire for some time after, and considered what she had said, and what it had cost her to say it, and whether she would have said it if she had planned the conversation in advance, rather than speaking from somewhere below the place where planning happens, and decided that she would not have. She would have said something more controlled. She was not certain the more controlled thing would have been better. Dinner was not what she had expected. The table in the formal dining room had been set for 4. The Duke sat at the head. Arabella sat at his right. Lady Fontenoy, the Duchess's mother, sat at his left. Cecily was placed across from Arabella, which positioned her in Lady Fontenoy's direct line of view and required her to hold her face in order throughout a meal she had been hoping merely to survive. Arabella was not what the name had suggested to Cecily in the month since she had first heard it. She had half expected, in the way one constructs a rival without meaning to, someone polished and certain, someone who wore the house as easily as her own skin, and who would manage, in every small, courteous exchange, to make Cecily feel the contrast. Arabella was instead a young woman of perhaps 20 years, slight and composed, with fair hair and gray eyes, and the quality of someone who had been trained to watch carefully before she formed an opinion, and who formed her opinions firmly once she had gathered sufficient evidence. She asked after the journey from Bath, and whether the new road through Wiltshire had proved better than it was reported to be. And when Cecily said that it had, Arabella said she was glad to hear it, and seemed to mean that she was glad, which was not a thing Cecily had expected to encounter tonight. I hope the East Room is comfortable, Arabella said at the soup. We had it redone in September. The wallpaper was in a state. It is very comfortable, Cecily said. Thank you. The blue is well chosen. It was his idea, Arabella said, meaning the Duke, who did not look up from his soup at this. He has good instincts about color, which surprised me, and then did not surprise me, once I understood him a little better. The Duke said nothing. There was nothing in his face to indicate he had heard her. But Cecily noticed, because she was close enough and paying the kind of attention that had been her primary skill in this house for 11 years, that one corner of his mouth moved by perhaps 2 millimeters in an upward direction, which she suspected was the most he permitted himself in public. Lady Fontenoy observed all of this from his left, and then observed Cecily with the expression of a woman taking inventory of a room to assess what ought to be removed from it. "I imagine Bath is quite lively in the season," she said to Cecily. "The company is very mixed there, I understand. Different sorts, altogether. I think it must suit a certain kind of person very well." "I have found it agreeable," Cecily said. Of course. Though I imagine it must seem very reduced after this." Lady Fontenoy indicated the room in a small, comprehensive gesture. "After having been here, it is a great deal to have had, and then not have. Though I suppose one adjusts." The candles held their light, and the fire was steady, and Cecily looked at Lady Fontenoy with the expression she had developed over 11 years of this particular kind of conversation, the expression that confirmed she had heard and declined to be injured. "One adjusts to a great many things," she said. "I have found the adjustment rather clarifying." Lady Fontenoy smiled. "The first Duchess is made of stern stuff," she said to the room, as though Cecily were not in it. "You see it in the portrait, that directness. I understand why people remember her." The Duke looked up from his plate. He did not look at Lady Fontenoy. He looked at Cecily. With that concentrated quality she had been cataloguing all evening, and said, in a voice that carried the same absence of inflection one might use to note the weather, that the fish was very good, and that he hoped everyone had found it so. The subject changed. After dinner, when Arabella had taken Lady Fontenoy to the drawing-room, the Duke said to Cecily in the doorway that he hoped she would rest well, and paused, and then added that Mrs. Ashmore's presence at the estate's charitable school distribution in the morning was of course not required, but that she was welcome if she wished to see the work, as the school had been her project in origin, and he did not wish her to think it had been allowed to lapse. She had started that school in the 3rd year of her marriage. She had argued for its funding for 2 years before it was granted. She had thought it had been quietly dismantled after she left. "I would like to see it," she said. He nodded, once, and went to join his wife in the drawing-room. And she went up to the east guest room and sat for a long time in the dark before she lit the lamp, thinking about a school she had thought the house had erased, and about the way a man looks at you when he has decided to look at you, and about what it costs to come back to a place you have finished grieving and discover that you were not finished. She slept, finally, because she had long since learned to sleep regardless of what her mind was doing, which was the single useful skill her marriage had given her. The charitable distribution was held in the village hall at 8:30, before the solicitor was due, and she went with the Duke in the estate carriage, and did not speak much on the way there because she was watching the park through the window and thinking about the last time she had made this drive, which had been in a different season, in a different life. He also did not speak much, but his silence had a different quality from the silences of the second Duke, which had generally been absences, spaces where engagement had been and then been withdrawn. His silence felt occupied. She could not explain the distinction more precisely than that. The hall was a low stone building at the village's north end that she had argued into being with the estate's charitable allocation in the autumn of her 3rd year. There were 11 children inside, ranging in age from perhaps 5 to perhaps 12, with a schoolmistress named Mrs. Pettigrew, whom Cecily did not know, which meant the school had outlasted its first mistress, which meant it had had more than one, which meant it had been maintained with some consistency of purpose. The children were receiving their quarterly books, and a small parcel each of paper and pencils and ribbon for the girls, and they received these things with the specific excitement of children for whom such things are not ordinary. Cecily stood inside the door and watched and did not speak. The Duke went to each child in turn. She had not expected that. He knew two of their names without prompting and asked a third to show him what he had been learning, and the boy, who was perhaps 8, produced a sheet of arithmetic with the pride of someone who has accomplished something he was not sure he could. And the Duke looked at the sheet carefully and said that it was well done, and the boy stood up straighter by about half an inch. She watched him do this, and was not prepared for what it cost her to watch it. He had not been here when the school began. He had been 12 years old, and away at school himself in the years when she had fought for the charitable allocation and hired the first mistress and arranged the book supply through a bookseller in Oxford. He had known none of it except what he had been told, or what the accounts recorded, or what the estate had been told when it was asked to continue the thing after she left. He had continued it. On the drive back, he said, looking at the park, that the original gift had been her stipulation, the Derbyshire property income directed to the school's costs rather than to the estate. Her father's money, applied to this. The estate had maintained it. He said it without ceremony, as though it were a matter of record, which it was. She thought of 3 solicitors' letters over 6 years that had not resolved the Derbyshire property. She thought of what it meant that the income from a property the estate had declined to correct had been going, in the meantime, to a school she had founded. She thought of a man who had died with something unsaid, and a 22-year-old who had been trying to understand the accounts of what that silence had cost. She did not say any of this. The carriage reached the house, and the solicitor was waiting. The meeting in the study took 2 hours instead of 1, because Lady Fontenoy attended it without having been asked, and required a thorough explanation of why a property the estate had been managing for 6 years was being returned to a woman who had left. The Duke provided this explanation with a patience that was itself a form of discipline, specific and complete. And when Lady Fontenoy said that one might wonder why the matter had not been raised earlier, Cecily said that it had been, 3 times, and the Duke said that Mrs. Ashmore was correct, and that the correction was overdue, and the papers were signed. Lady Fontenoy left without further comment. The solicitor gathered his documents. When he had gone, Cecily was alone in the study with the Duke for the first time, and she had begun to gather her gloves when he said, at the window, that he owed her an apology. She stopped. He was looking out at the grounds, the park going bare in the October wind, the tree line on the south edge stripped to its architecture. His hands were clasped behind his back. "Not on my own behalf," he said. "I was 19 when my father died, and I inherited a great many things I did not immediately understand, the house and its customs among them. I have been attempting to understand them better." She looked at his back, at the stillness of him against the window light. "For the house," he said, "for what it did to you. And did not do, which was perhaps worse." She thought carefully about what she wanted to say. She had been composing the response to this conversation for 6 years, in the abstract, in the way one composes responses to conversations one does not expect to have. None of the compositions were right for this version of it. "It was not the house," she said. "Houses do not choose their actions." "No," he said. He turned from the window. His expression had something in it that she had not seen last night at dinner, something that had been maintained last night and was not being maintained now. "My father told me, 2 months before he died, that the separation was the greatest error of his life. He did not tell me what he intended to do about it. He ran out of time to do anything about it. She heard this the way one hears a thing that one has entirely stopped expecting to hear, which is to say, she heard it, and it took a moment to travel from the ear to the place inside the chest where things of that weight land. "He did not say that to me," she said. "No," the Duke said. "He said it to me. I think he was practicing. I think he was working towards something, and did not reach it." She looked at her gloves. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. It was not hostile. She genuinely wanted to know. "Because you came here," he said. "Because you came for a property transfer and sat at our table and answered my mother-in-law's implications with better grace than she deserved, and because I have been trying to determine for 2 years how to say this to you, and you have given me an occasion." She looked at him. "It was his to say," she said. "He should have been the one." "Yes," the Duke said. "He should have." "He was not. I am aware of what that cost." A pause. "I cannot fix it. I can tell you what I know, which is that you were not wrong about what you were. You were not wrong about what the house required that you become." He knew that. He said it badly and too late, and then not at all, because he ran out of time. I am telling you now, because it seemed better than not telling you. She thought about what she had organized herself around for 6 years. The verdict. The departure from a station one has learned to inhabit, back to a smaller station, back to Camden Place, and comfortable reduced rooms and baths mixed company, and the general understanding that she was what she was, and had been something else once, and was now returned to her original category. She had built something from it. She had not collapsed. She had not wanted anyone to think she had collapsed. She had managed 6 years. She had organized all of it around a verdict that was not the whole truth. She looked past him at the window, at the park, at the October light going thin and clear across the grounds she had walked for 11 years. "It is worth something," she said. "I do not yet know how much. I will have to carry it for a while before I understand its weight." He nodded. He picked up something from the desk, turned it in his hands, set it down. It was a miniature in a battered tortoiseshell frame, the small portable kind one had made when a commission for the gallery was not possible or not yet settled, and she recognized it with a start that she controlled before it reached her face. It was her own face in it, the same pale gold gown, the same year, painted by the same artist at the same sitting, a preparatory piece that she had believed was lost or disposed of, and it was not in the storage room where the men had taken the gallery portrait. It was on this desk, on the second Duke's desk that had not been changed or cleared, where it had clearly been sitting in the position of something kept rather than stored, something placed for daily use, held in the ordinary way one holds things that matter by keeping them in the line of sight. She said nothing. She did not trust what she would say. "I should not detain you," the Duke said. "The carriage will be ready at 2. "Thank you," she said. She was at the door when he spoke again, behind her, saying only the word, "portrait." She turned. "I would like to rehang it," he said. "With your permission. It belongs to the house. My wife agrees. Whatever else is true, the portrait belongs where it was painted for. The gallery is not correct without it." She thought about the pale rectangle on the wall, the woman-shaped gap. "I am not the Duchess of Northfield," she said. "No," he said. "You are the subject of a portrait painted for this house's gallery. Those are different things. One can be the latter without the former." She stood in the doorway and looked at him, at this young man with his father's jaw, and his own particular stillness, who had kept a miniature in a desk drawer and a school running on her stipulation, and had been trying to find the words to say something his father had not said, and had found them on an afternoon in October when she had come for a property document, and he had given her an occasion. "Do as you see fit," she said. "The house's decisions are yours." She walked back through the gallery on the way to the east guest room, and the portrait was already on the wall. She did not know when they had found the time. The men must have been near enough to send for quickly, or perhaps the instruction had been given before the morning, in anticipation, which meant he had thought about it before this morning. She stopped in front of it and looked at herself. The younger self. The pale gold gown. The autumn leaves at the shoulder. The expression that the artist had directed and that she had not entirely owned, even at the time. Arabella was standing at the far end of the gallery. She had a quality, Cecily was learning, of arriving in rooms without making a sound of arrival. "He found the miniature 6 weeks after his father died," Arabella said, "in the second drawer of the desk. He has not moved it since." Cecily looked at the portrait. "He is not a man who speaks easily about the things that matter to him," Arabella said. "He has been composing this conversation since August. He had 3 drafts of a letter to you. He did not send any of them because he felt a letter would be insufficient." A pause. "I told him you were coming in October, and that he would have his occasion, and that he ought to take it. You told him that. He tends to require permission to do the thing he has already decided to do," Arabella said, with a quality that was not quite a smile, but was something warmer than neutrality. "I have found that providing it saves a great deal of time." Cecily looked at the woman at the end of the gallery, the young Duchess in her pale morning gown, who had redecorated the drawing room and maintained the school, and kept a difficult house's complicated history with, apparently, a degree of intelligence and generosity that no one had warned Cecily to expect. "You are very kind," Cecily said, "for a woman who had no reason to be." "You founded the school," Arabella said. "The children in it now were not born when you left. They will not know your name unless someone tells them. They are learning, and the money to teach them is yours." She paused. "I grew up without my father. I understand what it is to want someone's history returned to them, even if only in paint. You should not have left here without it." The afternoon coach carried her back to Bath through roads she had known well and then not known for 6 years, past the Wiltshire Downs and the first of the hill towns with their evening lights beginning. She sat with her worn gloves in her lap and her bag at her feet, and the landscape moving past the window, and she thought about many things. Not in order, not systematically, the way the mind works when it has been given more than it was prepared to hold. She thought about a miniature in a desk drawer, kept, held, visible. She thought about a school in a village hall with 11 children and a teacher she had not known, and arithmetic done correctly by a boy who stood straighter when someone looked at it carefully. She thought about a man who had practiced a thing he needed to say, and had not finished the practice before he died, and a son who had learned from that failure the particular cost of words left unsaid, and had refused to repeat it. She thought about the pale rectangle on the wall, and then the portrait back in it. She thought about what Arabella had said, about a history returned, about a woman who had been the subject of a portrait and was still alive, which was different from the portrait, which was different from the Duchess, which meant she was something that the frame could not contain and the house could not dispose of, and the verdict of the county could not accurately render, even when it tried. The coach reached Bath at 7:30. She walked to Camden Place in the cold and the first smell of coming winter in the air, and went to her rooms and sat in the chair by her window for a while in the dark, before she lit the lamp. The street below was quiet. A cat crossed the end of it and disappeared. She wrote the letter in the morning when the light was good enough. She wrote to the Duke formally and thanked him for the hospitality and for the execution of the Derbyshire documents. She thanked the Duchess for her particular generosity. She said the visit had clarified matters she had considered settled, which was perhaps the most precise thing she could say. And then, in the final paragraph, she said that if he found himself in Bath in the coming winter months, she would be glad to receive him and the Duchess for tea, as herself, which was to say as Cecily Ashmore of Camden Place, which was a different reception than she could have offered as the Duchess of Northfield, but which she suspected, on consideration, would be more honest. She sealed it and addressed it, and walked down to the post herself, rather than leaving it for the morning. 3 weeks later, a letter came back. She recognized the hand before she understood what she was recognizing, because she had not seen it in 17 years, and had not expected to see it again. And then she understood that it was not the Duke's hand, and it was not Arabella's hand, which she had been shown on the forwarded note of thanks. It was a hand she had last seen in the autumn of her 26th year, signing a marriage settlement in the November before she became the Duchess of Northfield, in the first and only letter the second Duke of Northfield had written to her in his own hand during their 11 years together, which had been a letter of introduction, written at the time of their engagement, and which she had kept, and then lost, and then decided she preferred to believe she had lost rather than know the alternative. The letter was 3 sentences. It said that the portrait was well. Arabella has sent me your letter and tells me I owe you more than a document correction and a dinner, and I have thought about it, and I believe she is right. Which is what I have come to understand about my wife. That she is right about obligations, and their proper weight, more reliably than anyone I have known. I will come to Bath in November, if you will have me. I will come not on behalf of the estate, but as myself, which is a distinction my father apparently did not know how to make, but which I have been, on Arabella's instruction, attempting to learn. Whether I have learned it sufficiently is not mine to judge. She set the letter on the table beside her chair. She looked at it for a long time. Outside the window, the first snow of the season was beginning, thin and tentative, the kind that was not yet committed to staying, the kind that came to see if it was welcome before it settled. The street lamps were just beginning to be lit. The light from the lamp on her landing came through the gap at the door in a warm stripe across the floor. She thought about the miniature in the tortoise-shell frame, kept in a drawer for 2 years, not displayed, not discarded, not sent to storage, simply held in the ordinary location of a thing one keeps because one cannot account for getting rid of it. She thought about a man who had died with something unsaid that his son had eventually said for him, imperfectly, in the only way available, which was his own voice in his own time on an afternoon in October when the occasion had presented itself. She thought about what the letter had said, not on behalf of the estate, as himself, the distinction offered for her to judge, the man with his father's jaw and his own stillness, who had stood at the window in the study and looked at the grounds and said that he was telling her, because it seemed better than not telling her. She picked up her pen. She wrote for perhaps an hour. She wrote 3 pages, which was longer than she had intended, and shorter than the subject deserved. And she found, in the writing of it, that she was not writing to the estate, and not writing to the 3rd Duke of Northfield, but to a young man who had been 12 years old when she came into his father's house and who had in the years since learned things about obligation and weight that his father had not lived long enough to demonstrate, and who had decided that the words his father had left unsaid were words he would say himself, whatever it cost him. She wrote that she would receive him gladly. She wrote that she thought Arabella was right about the distinction, and about most other things, and that he was fortunate in his wife. She wrote that she had spent 6 years believing a verdict that had been rendered in that house, and that she had built something solid from that verdict, something she was not sorry for, but that she had been building on a floor that had not been quite level, and she was still adjusting her balance, and she thought it was easier to adjust one's balance when one knew the floor was uneven, rather than believing it was yourself. She wrote in the last paragraph that she was not the woman in the portrait, and had not been for some years, and that she thought the woman she was now was better suited to an honest conversation than the woman she had been at 26, and that she was glad of the occasion. She sealed the letter and addressed it. She set it on the hall table for the morning's post, and went back to her chair by the window with her worn gloves in her lap. The gloves she had not replaced, the gloves that had carried her through rooms she had no business surviving, and which she had survived and found, sitting in the lamp-lit quiet with the snow falling outside on Bath and on Northfield, and on all the roads between them, that she was at peace. Not finished. Not resolved into anything simple or conclusive. She had lived long enough to distrust simple conclusions, which always turned out to be the wrong floor masquerading as solid ground. At peace with the waiting, which was different, and considerably harder, and considerably more honest about what peace actually was. The snow came down on Camden Place, and the lamp held its light, and the street was quiet. And somewhere in Northfield, in the second drawer of a desk in a study that had not been changed, a miniature in a tortoise-shell frame sat in its usual place, kept, held, visible to whoever sat at the desk. The letter she had written would arrive on a Wednesday. He would read it twice. He would not put it in a drawer. If this story held you until the end, leave a word in the comments below. She would have wanted to know she was seen.